Hello! Messing around with this pre-intro still. If you like it, let me know. I'd love to have a few new ideas or anything like that, but that's not why you're here. So tonight's show is going to be a video review. We haven't done one in a while, and it's from something from PragerU called What is Wrong with Atheism? Now, I haven't actually had a chance to check this video out past grabbing a couple of screen grabs earlier today to do the event, but I'm hoping it's not the same tired old arguments that we always seem to see. Anyway, you're not here at this moment in time to check that out, are you? No, you're here for the pre-show mix. So if you are catching the live stream, then you have about half an hour of me mixing first, and if not, you're probably going, what do you mean mix? What's a mix? Check out the Plato's Rave section if you're interested in some music and you're not catching this live. Hello and welcome to the SciPhi show. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
And I'm Philip.
And thank you for joining us today, Philip. I know it was a bit touch and go as whether you could.
Oh yeah, but it's fine. I like it when it's sort of spontaneous, and it was like just I had nothing else programmed, and then I managed to fit it in, so it's perfect. I'm really glad to be here.
And you're here because we are getting involved in a bit of philosophy of religion, which is one of your favourite areas of philosophy, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's like philosophy of religion touches on so many things, and that's mainly why I'm interested in it, because through it I have discovered so many other interesting areas of philosophy. It's not like an area that I think I'm going to change my mind on like much, honestly. I feel pretty comfortable and confident in the views that I hold that I hold right now, but it's still very interesting because of the many things that are brought into it and are very relevant when you talk about things in philosophy of religion. So yeah, it's one of my favorite areas of philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, I find it enjoyable from that angle as well. I think it's what I actually like about ethics. Because that too sort of gets involved in so many different areas of the world, and it has these real world applications and implications. And yeah, so I can understand why you'd sort of feel the same about philosophy of religion in the same way. Now, this video today is by PragerU, and I must admit, I am the person who knows nothing about anyone on YouTube. So I think I may have heard their name in passing before, but
Really?
they look to be.
Don't know anything about PragerU.
No. Oh, it's Prager.
Okay.
There you go. I can't even say it correct.
Yeah.
I thought it was Prager.
It's
so there you go.
Like a meme sort of channel. Not because they're not serious in what they sort of try to explain, but because like their views are usually like, I mean. It's
laughable.
Yeah, I mean, kind of. I mean, of course, like it's a very politically aligned channel, right? It's a very right-wing, politically aligned channel, and of course, I have no doubts that people on the right are going to find the ideas that they present slightly more agreeable. But I think a lot of people would agree that the way they present these things is like very sort of they try to make it look as professional as possible and as serious as possible, but the substance is usually very leaves a lot to be desired, let's just say. So yeah.
Fair enough. So well, I was hoping that this was actually going to be presenting something new and interesting. Are you suggesting that perhaps it won't, Philip?
I don't know. We'll find out. I mean, I have watched that video some time ago, but it was like a long time ago. So I don't remember exactly what he's talking about. I think it was like something about evolution and stuff. So yeah, we're gonna see. I think it's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, I must admit, I read the blurb and it was like, is there any meaning to life or is there nothing more than a cosmic accident? Scientific atheists claim the latter, but ironically, the science suggests the former. That made me go, oh, really?
Yeah, that's a very popular way to characterize.
I can imagine what the arguments are going to be already, and I was like, no, maybe no. Maybe they won't be.
We'll find out.
And Chris Taylor says, let me grab that thing. He said, if I was going to make a parody theist channel, it would be like PragerU. Oh dear. Well, at least tonight will be fun. Apparently, according to Ben as well, Mr. Deity parodies them with his Prager FU series, Go Devils. I've not seen Mr. Deity either. Like I said, I don't really get much time on YouTube, and when I do, I get lost in shorts before I actually get to anything of any real substance.
But I mean, you're not missing much, honestly. So I think shorts are actually probably a better investment of your time than this type of content.
Awesome. So, okay, I will quickly throw things into Be Right Back whilst I set everything up, but it should only take me a quick second because I've got everything ready. So I'll catch you all in just a sec, folks. So we're back in the room. Hopefully everybody can see that well enough. And I suppose I should... Is that coming through for everybody? It looks like it is. I'll put the old captions on. Now, how fast do they talk in this? Do we need to speed it up just a little bit?
No, I think we should be fine.
I think it was fine.
It's just fine. Yeah. 5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but you do realize it took us a 2 hours to answer a 1 minute video. So, you know.
That's true.
That was Luke's fault, though.
Well, it was my fault always. Like that's
well, everything comes back to you, Philip.
Yeah. Okay.
Okie dokie. So here we go.
In a recent interview, while I was presenting some scientific discoveries that may point to the existence of God, a camera operator, a young woman whom I'll call Maria, began to weep visibly. Later, she told me the reason for her tears. Like many young people, Maria believed in God when she arrived in college. But while there, she repeatedly encountered professors who insisted that based on the science, God was a myth, no more real than Santa Claus. Maria didn't feel equipped to challenge her professors. She eventually left college with nagging doubts about her faith and wondered whether life, including her own life, might be nothing more than a cosmic accident. Many young people share Maria's doubts. Indeed, powerful voices in the academy tell us that science makes belief in God and human significance untenable. Or as Richard Dawkins, the famed atheist from Oxford, has asserted, the universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. But are we the product of such indifference, that is, purely materialistic processes that did not have us in mind, as another scientific atheist has put it? Does the universe have the properties we should expect if this all there is matter vision of reality is correct? Perhaps not. 3 major scientific discoveries contradict the expectations of scientific atheists and point instead in a distinctly God-friendly direction. First, the Big Bang. Discoveries in observational astronomy and developments in theoretical physics have revealed that the universe had a beginning. This is contrary to the expectation of science.
Just to put this out there, the current state of the universe had a beginning. You know, our universe as it is now, the chain reaction, but we can't tell much before that, or if there even was a before. I mean, before doesn't make sense to us. I would say that yes, we could say that that was a beginning, but was it just a beginning of time? You know, we don't know enough about this to really say much more than that. It looks like there could have been, dense energy in the universe that was, completely timeless in itself. So there could have been something, and always something, and that then something happened, like, virtual particles, quantum twitches, that then happened to kickstart the Big Bang, which led to the sequence of events that led to our universe being in the state that we know today. So I always find that this sort of argument, and I mean, I know I haven't finished letting him speak, but it always seems to misrepresent some of the thoughts on it. It's just like, aha, well, there's this one thought that's wrong, so we're going to talk about this one. See, atheists are wrong.
Yeah, I think I share that in the sense that, like, this is going to go into some sort of cosmological argument. Like, it's pretty evident that that's the direction we're heading. I mean, maybe we should just let him take the whole thing till he starts with point 2. Okay. So that could be an easier way to reply to the whole thing.
All right.
Scientific materialists who long portrayed the universe as eternal and self-existent, and therefore in no need of an external creator. This evidence for a beginning has instead confirmed the expectation of theists. Nobel laureate Arno Penzias helped make a key discovery establishing a cosmic beginning. He later observed, "The best data we have are exactly what I would have predicted, had I nothing to go on but the first 5 books of Moses and the Bible as a whole." And he's not alone. Cosmological evidence has led other prominent scientists, including former MIT physicist Gerald Schroeder and the great Caltech astronomer Alan Sandage, to affirm a transcendent creator beyond space and time as the best explanation for the origin of our finite universe. Second, fine-tuning.
Okay. We could pause. Yeah. So yeah, this is. I mean, he doesn't go really into much depth on the cosmological argument. He just basically says, we would expect the beginning of the universe under theism. We don't necessarily expect that under naturalism or materialism or something like that. Therefore, that counts as evidence for theism, something like that. I mean, I think, honestly, at face value, I don't even want to disagree too much with this, right? I think it seems fine as a very sort of superficial level observation, right? That, I mean, that your religious worldview seems to you seem to expect exactly what you are finding under your religious worldview. But I think Joe, that the points that you made earlier are also fair and to be considered, right? I think we don't know nearly as much as some of these people would like to pretend about the beginning of the universe. We don't know exactly if it actually was the beginning of everything, right? And all sorts of things we don't know about, right? We don't know if it was just the beginning of sort of time, the way sort of time works when it comes to the Big Bang, especially on the sort of B theory of time, seems to be very awkward for theists as well. I mean, you don't have to explain, as a theist, how it is sort of intelligible to talk about sort of actions and deciding to start something or anything without time, if you want to claim that God is timeless and outside of time. But there's so many things that you have to bite the bullet on, or really that are not as easy to explain from a theistic perspective, I feel like, if you want to say that God is timeless, for example. I mean, ultimately, I don't find cosmological arguments particularly convincing, because there are many traits that need to be inferred from a first cause that seem like a stretch to me. And I think the gap problem that is often talked about when it comes to identifying sort of the first chain of the causation as God is really a pretty big problem, a pretty big gap that, in my view, hasn't been really convincingly, at least not to me, sort of crossed or yeah, filled. That would be my sort of take on the situation.
Yeah, Dave, did you have anything you wanted to add to that one?
No, that was beautifully put. Nice one, Philip.
Nerdy Rodent has a question, and what does it mean to be timeless again? And this is something that I struggle to get my head around, something being conscious and timeless.
Yeah.
There are different takes on it, and they all seem to have different problems. Some are timeless in the sense like not affected by time. Some are like outside time but experience their own time. Some are like completely outside of time but somehow still can think and move, and it's just, I've not heard a good explanation of a being able to be timeless.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can have like a being would be already very hard for me to understand like what it would mean to be a being, unless you're talking about being in sort of a philosophical sense where it doesn't mean to have like a sort of mental states or anything, right? But if you're talking about having mental states, I think unless you want to say that you just have one mental state, right, but the unchanging mental state, but then it would be very hard to sort of imagine what it means to sort of think or decide, right? Or all of these things seem to very clearly require, to me at least, like two states, right? Because like to try to cram everything into one state is as saying that that's just how things are. It's almost like saying that's just the natural state of things, right? Like if you don't have a moment, for example, for decision, where sort of at least two moments, right, where you sort of not in the moment of deciding something, right, still considering things maybe, or stuff like that, or like having an array of options in front of you, right, and then in the second moment you sort of decide, you pick out one element of the array which would count as a decision, right? That transitioning process from one to the other is what I would say counts as a decision, right? But you require two states to do that, and if you don't have them, right, if you're just without time, and you can have just one state, which is how I picture sort of timelessness, then that seems very hard for me. Like that seems just very hard to do. Some people have proposed like a local time within which God sort of lives. I think that is very hard to make work because of the way theists usually like to say or like to argue for the impossibility of an infinite past, but of course, if there's a local time for just God, that affects them as well. So, I mean, it's very hard for me to see how this would work. Also, like I've heard many critiques from theists to naturalists that you cannot go from a timeless state, even a sort of a natural timeless state, to time, right? Because it requires sort of a decision made, right? Because if you have just a state that is, say, imbalance or something, right, then it's never going to actually lead to time, right? It's never going to lead to anything because, if nothing happens, right, and you don't have time, right, then all there's going to be is just that state, right? But if that state is balanced, then it's never going to lead down a chain of causation, right? But in my opinion, that is fairly easy to sort of get over as a naturalist, right? I don't see why the first state, for example, cannot exist timelessly, right, as the first state, necessary state, in a state of imbalance, in which case the moment, and I know that I'm using sort of temporal language here, right, but if that first state is one that is not stable, right, the moment it exists, it would lead down a chain of sort of, it would cause time, right, essentially. So I don't see a problem with that, right? The first state would just be there. It's unstable, and that's it, right? Because I think a lot of people fail to picture, like a lot of people think of timelessness as still in sort of a temporal sense, right? They think of a long time, right, where nothing happens, right? But timelessness is not a long time. There is no time, right? It's just one thing, right? So that thing can be whatever, and it would count as timeless, right? So long as it's not preceded by anything, right, that leads to it, it is timeless, right? Almost by definition, if it's the first chain of events, it would be timeless, right? So I simply don't see a problem, right, with saying that the first moment is sort of an unstable sort of state that exists timelessly, which means literally just the moment it starts existing, which doesn't even make sense to talk about because starts existing implies that there was a moment before that, right? So It just
It
exists,
just always was.
and then time starts rolling out, and that's the Big Bang or whatever, right? That's a totally feasible option in my opinion. And yeah, I mean, I never found these types of arguments particularly convincing, cosmological in this sense.
Do you have anything to add to that, Dave?
No, my thoughts are pretty much similar. For me, I just can't get my head around what the idea of something timeless could even be, especially like Philip says, in the sense of where you can actually separate out different moments, which can't happen if something's timeless.
Yeah.
Can't change, like Philip said. You know, so I can't even conceive of a being like that actually does something. There's like a logical structural error going on there, at least as far as I'm concerned, anyway.
Definitely seems that way. You know, just to reiterate the point I made earlier about sort of the start of the universe, you know, sort of pre-Big Bang being sort of pure photon energy, and having these matter and antimatter pairs, and then you had your quantum fluctuations, which sort of, you know, made an imbalance and caused, you know, the chain reaction to happen. Now, Chris actually says light photons are actually considered timeless, he thinks. And Ben says photons are an interesting example, yet they can begin to exist and cease to exist within our local time. So in a sense, timeless would not mean always exists. And yeah, I mean, it's a confusing concept. And I just don't think it's something that really adds anything to the theists' arsenal. I think it's almost trying to shoehorn God in there in some way and not caring about the implications of what timeless actually means.
Sort of like trying to get something out of nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of theists try to explain to me how that would work. But I mean, like Craig also, right? Like, if we want to talk about something like the Kalam, right, and then what Dave just said, right? I think he also like neglects just that. I mean, a lot of the evidence that he uses to support his premises in the Kalam. I mean, we were going to go back to talk about sort of efficient material causes, all of that, right? But he himself, right, likes to talk about efficient material causes and all of these things, right? But I mean, the point being, without going into too much detail, right? Like the way the things that he says in support of the premises seem to support a premise, like seem to support an argument, right? That would lead to a conclusion that he doesn't like or that he cannot accept, because it would lead to conclude that the universe had a material cause as well, which is of course something that you cannot sort of, as a theist, you don't like to say, right? And it also doesn't make really much sense if you conceptualize the universe as the collection of everything that is material as well, right? So it doesn't make sense in that case. So that's why Craig sort of dismantles that, right? But that means that even though you have all these evidence for these two premises, right, there can be something which has the support of these premises, yet according to you is false as well, right? Because that would lead you to believe that the universe has a material cause, but it doesn't, right? Because according to the theist, right, the universe is created ex nihilo. So as much as theists like to mock atheists that, you know, they believe that the universe came from nothing, I mean, sure, the atheists sometimes, and very, very few atheists, from my experience, actually believe that the universe came from nothing. This is another point that actually sort of irritates me quite a bit, because I do see theists claim all the time that, oh yeah, atheists, the universe came from nothing, haha, magic stuff, right? I very rarely have seen atheists claim that. But even if, right, like the theist believes something that is not exactly the same, but in some respects similar, right? It's not that big of a bigger miracle if you're already willing to just shove sort of a material cause away, in my opinion, right? You're already accepting something that's pretty absurd for the way we usually see causation work. So yeah.
Yeah, good answer. So I think we're ready to move on from that. Did you have anything you wanted to add before we did, though?
No.
Yeah,
There's lots to talk about, but some of it from the very beginning too.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about as well. I don't know if we want to do it now, but there's a lot to talk about in the intro, right?
Yeah, like a
there's
lot.
there.
We'll do it after the video's finished. If we're going to be stopping them at certain points.
Yeah, I just hope that I'm going to remember everything.
I'll remember. Trust me.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, number 2.
Second, fine-tuning. We live in what Australian physicist Luke Barnes calls an extremely fortunate universe, where fundamental laws and physical parameters have somehow been fine-tuned with just the right strengths and values to make life possible. The incredible odds against this happening by chance has led even agnostic and atheistic physicists to marvel. As British physicist Paul Davies has exclaimed, the impression of design is overwhelming. Atheist physicist George Greenstein expresses similar cognitive dissonance. The thought insistently arises that some supernatural agency must be involved. Third, the complexity of life.
Let's go back.
Okay. Yeah.
So, do you wanna start on this one?
Me?
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm going to start, it's going to be a lot. But yeah, I mean, this is another one, right? Like these are just basically classic apologetic arguments, right?
Yeah.
I don't find that there is anything particularly new here. I mean, they're framed as sort of like scientific things that support theism, right? I mean, as I said in the first case, I do think that if you really want to sort of like conceptualize, if you have like a concept of evidence that is similar to what I seem to think as evidence, right? Then I see how a theist could say that, you know, a universe with a beginning is evidence for theism. I would count it as extremely weak evidence for theism, but certainly in a comparison scenario, right? I mean, there's no reason why you would expect like an actual beginning on naturalism or on materialism, while there is at least seemingly a reason to expect that on theism, because that's the story that theism usually tells. I mean, with fine-tuning, I have less of that sort of insight, I'd say. Not because, I mean, I kind of get what theists are trying to get at, right? But I just don't think, at least personally, I'm not really able to figure out if our focusing on this particular instance, right, on the uniqueness of these laws that permit life, right? We're sort of focusing on life as if it was something extraordinary, right? We're picking that fact out, and then we're sort of saying, oh, well, look at how unlikely it is that life would emerge. And I think, I mean, that's fine, right? If you pick out life as something completely extraordinary, then yes, but I think that our bias as humans is to see life as this extraordinary thing, right? And I think that's where it comes from. And I haven't really found like why you would take life to be something completely extraordinary sort of in an objective sense, right? Because technically you could also say, look, I'm gonna take a deck of cards here, right? I'm gonna shuffle it, and I'm gonna have a sequence of cards that is never gonna be like ever repeated, probably till the death of the universe, right? Because of how many combinations you can have in a deck of cards, right? Now, that is technically a very unlikely scenario that the cards would land in this exact pattern, right? It's like almost impossible that it happened. It probably never happened throughout history that the cards are in this exact order, right? So you could technically go and say, oh, well, look at how unique this event is, right? There must be something to it, right? It couldn't happen just by chance. You know how like little the chances of the cards ending up in that order. Like it's almost impossible that they would end up in that order by chance, right? But that's because you sort of ascribe value to that sequence, and you say, oh, look, this has value, right? So how probable it is that this would end up in this precise sequence? And the answer is very, very unlikely, right? But there's like little reason to take this still as something extraordinary, right? If I had one particular sequence on a table in my kitchen, right, of cards and you walked in and said, oh my God, this is so unlikely. Therefore, you probably arranged it, right? There must be design behind this because it's so unlikely that it would have just ended up by chance, right, in this sequence. Then you would be mistaken when you say that, because it's very likely that someone just shuffled the cards, right? So, again, I don't want to say that this is sort of a knockdown argument against fine-tuning, because there's a lot of back and forth. I'm just talking personally. I haven't seen a reason as to how I would distinguish between the cards example, right, and say something where it's actually appropriate to think about it in terms of how likely it is, right?
I'd agree with you there. I mean, it's one of the things that I said, and actually Ben says that this kind of sounds like a quote mine, like he's been quote mining all these different bits that we've seen happen from a number of different people in the past. But there's obviously additional thoughts that these people have come up with that he's neglected to include, other than mentioning that they're atheist or agnostic. And I will say that, you could quote mine me by saying, sometimes I look out to the universe and I'm in complete awe of it, the way it all works together, and I think about how we're, the Earth's rotating round and going around the sun, and the sun is going through. I start to think about it, and I go, this is mind blowing. But just because my tiny little brain has trouble thinking about how this stuff works, doesn't mean that, as you said, it could be quite as simple as throwing a deck of cards down. And over a long enough timeline, pretty much anything can happen. So even if life was incredibly improbable, it doesn't mean it's impossible. Sure, would life be more likely under theism? Yeah. If that's what the God wanted, obviously, which we would assume it was, because that's a lot of the arguments that come out. But I don't think it's a particularly good argument in support of theism either.
Yeah, just to illustrate, maybe again with the card example, right? If I shuffle the cards and they end up in a perfect new deck order, right? That's the exact same probability as me shuffling and then ending it in any other order, right? Have the exact same probability all the time, right? But if they ended up in the exact new deck order, right, you would go completely nuts, right? Because you would be, oh my God, how is this even possible, right? This couldn't be. You would start to suspect the delay. You would say, oh my God, he's sort of cheating, right? Because he's manipulating the cards. There has to be something going on here, right? But that's because you beforehand, right, before the shuffle happened, right, you already have an idea of a sequence in mind, right? And you already know that precise sequence is very unlikely, right? So, and you attribute value to that sequence, right? Because that's the value, that's the sequence that you recognize, right? So when it appears, you're like, oh my God, this is impossible, right? This is a miracle. But technically, there is the exact same probability for any sequence. So, I just personally struggle with this, right? This might be my problem. I totally grant that maybe there are sort of ways to conceptualize or ways for the theist to answer to this. I'm not pretending that this is the highest level of conversation around these sorts of talks, right? But for me, I struggle with this problem. I am not able exactly to figure out if it's appropriate, if it's expecting a new deck order, or if it's expecting any sequence, right? That's my problem. So yeah, that would be it.
Well, this is one of the things as well. When you come down to probability, whether there was or was not a God, right? The way life is on this planet and the way people are, it's still incredibly unlikely that the sperm and egg that made you or you would have met, right? It's incredibly, incredibly unlikely. And that's why I did an article called The Statistical Improbability of You. And it was taking some very basic figures, right? Averages and everything like that. And it was quite conservative in certain areas. And the probability that any one of us is here as us is incredibly unlikely. Unless you take a hard deterministic stance, in which case the probability was 1. But that aside, right? It's incredibly unlikely. So the statistical improbability of something isn't necessarily a good argument against it. If there's still a possibility something can happen over a long enough timeline, it could happen. Now, there's a question saying from Nerdy Rodent saying, if the universe is fine-tuned, what other sorts of universes can exist? So this is one of the things that often comes up. I mean, we often think about our universe as Douglas Adams' puddle analogy, you know, because everything seems like all, you know, perfect life for us to exist on this planet, that we assume that it was created for us, much like a puddle would assume that the hole in the ground was perfectly created for the water to go in and create itself. Now, I mean, you can argue against that from our planet, considering most of our planet is actually inhospitable to humans. And the rest of the universe, from what we can see, seems pretty inhospitable as well. So it seems pretty strange to have this massive universe just to have one planet in it, at least in range, that we can say, oh yeah, it's this planet. This is the only one. But if you're saying if the universe is fine-tuned, what other sorts of universes can exist? Now, there's a few different takes on this. You could say that if you know, say that physics was slightly different, we could be slightly different. You know, life could have still evolved, but perhaps, you know, there was more gravitational pull, and we're a lot more stockier, square people. You know, more people would look like me. You could say that there could be a universe where life wasn't possible at all. There could be a universe which actually was even more finely tuned for life. You know, it's kind of an up in the air question. I mean, what can you imagine? What can you actually conceive of? What is logically possible to exist? That's possibly what other universes could exist. The thing is, if it's one that doesn't support life, then no one would ever know about that one unless they found some way to travel into it.
Yeah, but even then, like, let's imagine that, like, in a universe without life, let's imagine the absurd, right? That some, I don't know, rock or something becomes conscious or something, right? They could, I mean, I don't know if they could make the exact same arguments, right? But they presumably could make similar arguments, right? In the sense that there's probably a pretty slim chance of sort of parameters that have to be sort of in a very slim range for them to be there in the exact same way that they are, right? In a way. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing that sort of puts me off a bit, but also, like, I want to clarify a few things, right? Because a lot of theists, I mean, theists mean different things when they talk about fine-tuning.
They do.
Right? And especially historically, things have changed a lot, because it used to be, before sort of evolution was discovered, that first of all, I believe that at that time, fine-tuning was pretty, like, much more powerful than it is today. Yep. Right? But it used to be that theists took, and some theists still do, right? Like Ray Comfort or others, right? That the features that we have, like the way things are adapted to us, right, in nature, like the banana example, right, or any other, right, of these things, that itself is evidence for theism, right? Because of how well things in nature exist that adapt to us when we need them and stuff like that, right? Since evolution, right, a lot of that mystery has been cleared up, because it's obvious why things, like why we are adapted to our environment, and why the environment is adapted to us, right? That's cleared up because of evolution, right? Evolution is a sort of completely thoughtless, doesn't require a mind of any sort of intentionality, right? And it leads to these phenomena, right, where organisms are adapted to their environment. So the puddle analogy here comes very, very handy, right? Very handy, because it explains this perfectly, right? But the thing that most theists today, when they talk about the fine-tuning argument, refer to is not these sorts of, like, oh, look at the banana that fits perfectly in my hand, or something, Ray Comfort style things, right? it's not about that, right? They usually refer to the sort of fact of life itself, right? Life existing itself. They're not talking about the details of the things, right? Because they, like, I mean, a lot of them at least accept that evolution is true and that explains perfectly why these things sort of look like they're designed and they're adapted. But the sort of life itself thing, that's what theists are usually referring to, and the unlikelihood of life itself. How sort of slim of a margin these sorts of parameters have to have in order to bring about life. So that's just to clear up a potential sort of misconception there.
Yeah, another thing about historical fine-tuning as well. I mean, it used to be thought that we were at the center of the universe and the sun revolved around us. And, you know, there were a lot of cosmological misconceptions, which again would mean that if these were true, then it would add a bit more weight to theism because, yeah, we're at the center of everything. But we're not even at the center of our own galaxy, really, you know? Yeah. Like, so, yeah.
Yeah, that's an argument for atheism, right? That I think is I mean, it's not the best argument for atheism, but it's a pretty decent one in my opinion. Like, I think it's sometimes referred to as the argument from scale, right? Which is just that it seems so like the universe is so big and like you wouldn't expect that given theism. I think that's perfectly reasonable to say, right? You wouldn't expect given theism that if theism cares about sort of our life or something, that we would end up with a universe that is largely inhospitable to life and stuff like that, or humans are sort of like a very tiny part of it. It's not like incompatible or anything, but you certainly wouldn't expect it, I think, if you just knew that there was like a God doing like a universe for sentient beings, right? That there would be like this vastity that is completely inhospitable to life. So yeah, that's a very, I mean, that's I think a decent sort of rebuttal to this type of argument. Another thing, I don't know if we have time to get into this, but there's also like probably my favorite argument against this, which is called Electrons and Love. It's a paper written by, wait a minute, I'm going to look him up. I think he's Neil, I'm going to butcher his surname, Sinababu, probably, Neil Sinababu, right? He has written a paper which is called The Divine Tuning versus Electrons and Love. And I think it's one of the most beautiful papers. Like, it's very fun to read and it's really interesting and really good, in my opinion. There's also a talk with him on tautology with Alex Malpass, if you're interested and if you sort of prefer a more sort of conversational thing. And his point essentially is the following, right? That under theism, life can exist without the brain, without the mind, right? Because God is a mind that is not physical, right? So you have already an example of a mind that is not physical, of life really without the physical, right? But if a theist is, I mean, a theist pretty much is committed to this view because of God, right? Because they picture God as not being a material thing, right? So a theist is committed to the view that there is at least one example of a mind of life, really, that is not physical, right? So then the question becomes like the way sort of fine tuning works, right? Is they usually look at all these parameters that need to be in place perfectly for the things that we know about our life to be true, right? But that's talking about the physical aspects of our life, right? For example, that it has to be a certain temperature, right? This gravity has to work in a certain way for sort of all these phenomena that we know, right, to emerge that then lead to the possibility of life, right? All of this is sort of like a physical descriptions of all the things that needed to happen in order for the way we are to emerge, right? For our sort of the physical necessities really of the way we understand our life to emerge. But the point he's making is that, of course, this didn't have to be this way, right? In a sense, for God, because on theism, it's perfectly possible to have life without all of these material things, right? It could be perfectly possible, in fact, on theism for electrons really or just particles to have mental states and have like be alive, right? And fall in love and all of these things, right? Because sort of the complexity of mental states and mentality and life in general is sort of untied. At least there is one example that is untied from the physical, right? So there can be presumably other ways to do that, right? And in this sense, this sort of removes a lot of power then from the argument from fine-tuning, right? Because the argument for fine-tuning is saying, look at how unlikely it is that these ranges are exactly the way they are for us to emerge, right? But the point here is that life could be any other way, right? It doesn't have to be in this very tiny range, right? Under theism, because you can reasonably expect under theism that life could exist in other ways, that God could make life just completely untied from the physical, right? So then all these considerations about how unlikely it is that the physical sort of aspects are the way they are is completely irrelevant, right? Because in all other scenarios, even if these sort of variables were a bit different, right? That wouldn't matter. God could still bring up life, right? God could still create life in the same way that He is alive without being tied to the physical, right? So that sort of is a very, I think, strong sort of underminer of some of the sort of premises of fine-tuning, probably even more so than what I said before, right? That what I said before was more like my problem, right? But this is actually a very, very interesting, I think, very powerful rebuttal to fine-tuning.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Dave, did you have anything you wanted to chuck in there?
No, that was perfectly put, as always. There is an argument that some theists make, though, that the fact that life can, in this endless universe, the fact that life can only exist on this planet on a very small part is evidence of God's power, because He can create this vast universe. And it only existing here shows the kind of power He's capable of. I've heard that sort of rebuttal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, so that's it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not particularly good. I mean, you could say something like, well, if the point was to show power and show how effective it was, you could always say that it would be a better show of power for Him to create a universe where the physical didn't explain her existence on this small, and therefore it would immediately be a better design for that.
You'd think an omniscient God would know a better way to show His power, wouldn't you? Yeah. Okay, so Esmond, do you guys think that atheists need to provide an argument that would prove that God does not exist? Okay, so it depends what you're talking about by need here. You know, I mean, I would suggest that atheists should be able to justify to themselves, at the very least, of why they believe or don't believe whatever they believe. Now, atheism is polysemous. We tend to say we believe gods don't exist. I know some only lack belief. Forgetting the label, right? Whatever their actual belief position is, they need to be able to justify, at the very least to themselves, why they hold the position they hold, even if it's they don't believe God does or does not exist. You know, that's where they are. They're on the fence. They haven't made up their mind. They still need to actually consider the arguments for and against a God existing and be able to say why they don't accept both sets of arguments. If you want to know my specific positions on this, I actually released an article on Answers in Reason, which says, why do I believe gods don't exist? It's quite a lengthy article, but it goes through my history of what led me to non-theism in the first place, and what started Answers in Reason, and our streams and everything like that, and then all the arguments that I find in supporting of atheism, as in, you know, gods not existing. Now, do they prove that no gods exist without a doubt? Of course not. Of course not. There's still room there. Some God claims, though, are logically incoherent, right? So they can't exist as claimed. Could they be based on a particular God and it's just been written down wrong? Yeah, maybe. But, you know, there's enough argumentation within there for me to feel justified in saying that I believe gods don't exist, and there are certain gods that can't exist the way they have been written. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think I'm perfectly in line with what you just said. I find it funny that you said it depends on what you mean by need, and I replied like a few moments before, like, it depends on what you mean by proof. So we're almost questioning every word that this guy is using.
So you did. Anyone would think that we have an interest in philosophy. So yeah, on your point there about proved, you're talking about, do you mean justify why you hold the position?
Yeah, exactly. That's what you already brought up, right? And of course you're correct as well, right? I mean, if you don't lean either way, right, then you probably have to have some sort of reason why you don't lean either way, right? To justify, as you mentioned, right? But if you do actually think that God is unlikely, right, or that God is impossible, whatever your stance is, right? But even if you just think that God is unlikely, which I mean, my personal stance is that God is very, very unlikely, right? I have like a very high credence in atheism. And I sort of, the way I use atheism here would mean sort of the proposition that God doesn't exist, right? But yeah, I agree with what you said, Joe. I think, again, it depends on what you mean by proof, right? Some people think you just need to provide a proof, right, of it. But then proof is also like sometimes interpreted in different ways, right? Because you could just write down a deductive argument, right? And that would count as a proof, technically speaking, because in logic that is called a proof, right? Even though, I mean, it's not like it's a sure thing, right? If you just write down a deductive valid argument. So, I mean, you have to, as Joe said, right? You have to justify it somehow. If you think that this is likely the case, right, then you have to have some sort of reason why you think that's the case. And if someone asks you to, right, if you actually want to talk to this person, then you probably should sort of explain to him why you think that this. That you think or believe that this is true, right? That you believe that God doesn't exist, or that you believe that God is unlikely, all these things.
Yeah, I think we're probably in complete accord there. Dave, do you want to throw any spanners in the works?
Nope. Both of you said it perfectly.
Awesome. Okay, so you all ready to move on to the third point I think he's going to make?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nothing else you wanted to chuck in there?
No,
I don't think so.
Cool. All right, on we go. And yeah, please get any questions or comments in as well, and I'll get to them after this bit.
Must be involved. Third, the complexity of life. Molecular biology has revealed the presence in living cells of an exquisite world of informational nanotechnology. Digital code in DNA and RNA, tiny, intricately constructed molecular machines, a complex information storage, transmission, and processing system that resembles but vastly exceeds our most advanced digital high technology. Not what anyone would expect to see as the result of blind, materialistic processes. Dawkins himself may have conceded as much when he recently confessed to being knocked sideways with wonder at the miniaturized intricacy of the data processing machinery in the living cell. So what should we make of all this? For their part, scientific atheists have constructed ever more convoluted and fanciful theories. They posit alien designers to account for the code of life, multiple parallel universes to try to explain fine-tuning, and they've developed elaborate mathematical equations in an attempt to use physics to show how the universe could have begun from nothing physical. But what if the scientific atheists are just wrong? What if the universe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is an intelligent and purposeful creator behind it all? In my book, Return of the God Hypothesis, I argue that the universe has precisely such properties. And that raises a hopeful possibility that we are not the product of blind, pitiless indifference, but instead that we were made on purpose, that we were intended. British historian Paul Johnson has argued that the existence or non-existence of God is the most important question we humans can ever ask. Given the scientific evidence we now have, it might be time to consider or reconsider this question. I'm Stephen Meyer, philosopher of science at the Discovery Institute for Prager University. Thank you for watching this video. To keep PragerU...
Right.
So,
Stephen Mayer. Selling your book.
Discovery Institute is also like a very, I mean,
It's just like a creationist creation science thing, yeah.
kind of like borderline, more or less. Also, they have published some papers. I mean, they are financed to sort of try to find scientific evidence for God. I mean, I think I saw this on Twitter. I think Emerson actually at some point tweeted like a complete, maybe he did so in a counter apologetics video, right? He sort of went through one of these papers, and it's pretty hilarious, I think, because like the way they sort of talk about certain results is like very far off their own actual results. So yeah. But anyway, I think the point 3 was something like the complexity of biology and stuff like that. I loved how he said that Dawkins conceded that it must be some sort of like miracle, because he said that he wonders how magnificent this thing is, which is just like...
Yeah, I mean, it's applying a precision of language or a context of language that isn't there. Yeah, it's just like, I feel like that's just plain dishonest, right? I don't think that Dawkins meant that in any way. So that seems just dishonest to me, that someone says, oh, I find this so magnificent, right? And you say, oh, that must mean that you also seem to see the problem here, right? But if it comes about like the points that he's making about the biology, I'm just going to say very simply and very plainly, I don't know enough about this topic in terms of biology and how complicated these things are and what these sort of naturalistic explanations are for these things. So I think I'm just gonna shut up in the sense that, like, I'm pretty sure that actually this I'm sure of, right? That there are a ton of brilliant scientists that are working on this that don't agree with these views, right? But I personally don't feel like I have enough information to say anything about it, other than point to people that actually know more than me that disagree with these things. That would be my response, I think, as sort of disappointing as it may be.
What about you, Dave?
Yeah, I'm the same. I don't really know enough to actually make any kind of great argument for it. But I generally tend to go with Hume's argument from design for stuff like this. Just because it looks like this thing, it's also got so many other things that aren't similar, so it seems unlikely that it is the same thing. You have to be quite close for that kind of analogy. And also just naturalism leads me to conclude that it seems unlikely that all this stuff has been programmed into it.
Yeah, my only thing I'd probably add to it is the fact that it's sort of a metaphorical use of language. It's code and little machines and things like that.
Yeah, that's what it is. They're little analogies to make it easier to understand or for people to grasp the concept of what's going on, but then they're taking it very literally and trying to make an argument from it without the context of the metaphor.
Yeah, and I mean, if DNA was a code, it's a really shitty coder. So if you're trying to argue a perfect designer and that's the code, come on.
We are a beta test for an EA software programmer. That's why it's so goddamn glitchy and we have Risen Dead.
Brilliant. I don't know. I don't think it's particularly great or convincing argument there either. I don't know how someone can actually sit there and actually present this and say, yeah, these are all the things that are wrong with atheism, and then be quite weak arguments. And you know, like there are better arguments for theism. there are better arguments for theism. Like, the fact that it's
there's better arguments against atheism.
Yeah.
Yeah. Much better.
And the fact that it always seems to come back to these arguments, I find quite disappointing. I noticed actually someone complaining about atheists always have the same arguments. It's like, well, most atheistic arguments are responses to theistic arguments and claims and things like that. So if someone out there wants us to have new responses, maybe they should get new arguments. You know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that like most arguments for atheism are pretty much all variations of the same thing, and that most arguments for theism are pretty much variations of the same thing. So, I mean, you can complain about atheistic arguments being always the same, right? But they, in my opinion, they're strong. They're very strong. Like for me, I don't find the same strength in theistic arguments. But I suppose that for a theist, this would be sort of the opposite. So yeah, I think we're sort of in this state, right? I mean, there's very few new arguments, I think, that are not sort of variations of existing arguments. So,
yeah, I mean, even if you get a thought yourself about something new as well, all of a sudden, actually, someone's written a really refined version of your argument a decade ago, and you're like, I thought I had an original thought, but nope, someone had that thought but made it better, damn it. Paul Marco says, it seems like complexity is what you'd expect from self-replicating and evolving molecules. And, I mean, yeah, over time, it's if you sort of understand the evolutionary path that we've taken from sort of the single-celled all the way up to where we are, and all the problems along the way, and all the evolutionary suffering that's gone on, it is what you'd expect from something that happened naturally. It doesn't seem like it's taking a perfect path. So, yeah, I mean, you might get a different kind of complexity, I guess, from a perfect creator, but you wouldn't have things like the junk DNA and everything like that still left in us. And, you know, how some people end up with things like vestigial tails and all of that. Surely you wouldn't get that from a perfect creator. You know, we've got this additional complexity more than we need because it's something that's happened naturally.
Yeah. I also I think if you just look at the complexity of an evolved organism and argue that complexity is somehow evidence for theism, I think you probably you just, that's not a convincing argument if you know anything about evolution, in my opinion. Right? I think at best, the best version, I think, if I had to steelman that argument, would be sort of rewinding the clock to the very beginning, right? When evolution has to start somehow, right? At that point, to argue about the complexity that already has to be there somehow to sort of kick off the whole evolutionary chain, right? That would be sort of the way I would argue as a theist if I had to sort of think. Sort of argue along these lines, because all the things that come after that, I mean, I think they're perfectly clear by evolution, and you'd be very hard pressed, I think, as someone who understands evolution, to find anything there that you can sort of grasp to as a theist, I think.
Yeah, that's fair. Shall I quickly swing things back to the big screen, and we can address the bits that Dave wanted to from the beginning?
Yeah, I want to talk about these as well.
Okay, guys, I will be back in just a couple of seconds. And we're back. There we go. See, that wasn't too long that time, was it? So yeah, just in summary of that video, pretty poor show, pretty typical arguments. I'm sure we gave pretty typical responses, and that goes back to what I said before of, you know, if you want new responses give us new arguments. I'd like something that makes me go, oh, I'm going to have a couple of days to think about this one, rather than, oh, this again. But Dave, take us away.
Well, two things to say about the video first. Is that one, it's a pretty good example that private education is a terrible idea. Because, you know, that's an education run by a bunch of different people with these ideological outlooks, and there's the product. Don't privatize education. And even though it's free on YouTube, we're overcharging.
He's also selling his book off the back of it.
Yeah, exactly. And privatized education full of adverts.
Yeah.
So again, privatized education bad.
And complaining that they're experiencing severe censorship on big tech platforms.
Yeah. But the thing at the beginning, it was pulled straight out of a God's Not Dead film. You know what I mean? It was like God's Not Dead, the miniseries. And that's what they're running like. Have you seen The Walking Dead have those little vlog spin-offs where it's 1 minute shorts showing a bit of a storyline outside of the main storyline? That's how that felt for me for God's Not Dead. I have this camera woman who broke down in tears. When does that happen? You know, I mean, maybe it does in Christian circles, but my credence levels are kind of low here. And I've never met any like professor of philosophy who would ask you what you believe in God, especially they're like that. And I've never heard anybody say science says that, you know, what terms do they use? God.
Yeah, science says that God is impossible. Not
is a
maybe
myth.
Impossible, but yeah, it's just a myth. Yeah, that was the
yeah.
word used, yeah.
I've never heard any science like university-based science say that. No university-based philosophy say that science is.
Yeah. To be fair, plenty of online atheists.
Online atheists do. Yeah.
And I mean, they would be wrong, right? Just to be clear, they like online atheists would be wrong in saying that science has killed God or something like that. I think the point that you can make is that science has removed a lot of what we used to explain with God, right? And that would be a perfectly fair point. And I think that is expected under naturalism, and it is not expected under theism, because you would expect under theism that it would be still, or that there would be that the ratio of explanations, naturalistic explanations that overtake supernatural explanations remains sort of balanced, right? Or at least that not every supernatural explanation eventually gets explained naturalistically. That is very unexpected in theism, so that you could take that as evidence against supernaturalism and therefore as evidence against theism. So, I mean, there are plenty of ways you could turn science into an argument against theism, I think, effectively. But saying that science just shows that God is a myth is not going to cut it. That's not going to work.
Yeah, you can have a few problems finding that actual science experiment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Specific claims, as you say, Philip, you know, that science might do, like creationism, young Earth creationism. You know, you've got the various dating methods, for example, and evolution. And as you mentioned as well, you know, the God of the gaps. Well, the gaps are getting smaller and smaller. There's less and less explanation put down to God did it. Yet there's still some gaps. Yeah. Maybe one day science will close all those gaps. I doubt it, though. But yeah, there is no science has proved no gods exist. That's just silly.
Yeah, and then he also mentioned about how it also gives you no meaning in the second bit. Kind of slipped that one in along with that. And quoted Dawkins. Yeah. And the Dawkins quote is kind of taken out of context, I'd say. He's saying that there are no intrinsic meanings in the universe. If atheism is true and there is no God. But he's not saying it's meaningless. I think there's a distinction there that needs to be kind of made. Yeah. It's, you know, we give value and meaning to things, so therefore it's not meaningless. It's just intrinsically meaningless.
Yeah.
there's this emotional undertone that was present throughout the video, and that you see in a lot of theist conversations, where they're sort of like, oh yeah, if you sort of agree to atheism, then everything is meaningless, right? Depression,
You'll have an
nihilism,
existential
right?
crisis.
Exactly. Everything collapses, right? I personally can say, like, I mean, this is just personal experience, right? From personal experience, I think that's not the case. Like, I guess that for some theists who really sort of are deep into that might happen, right? But for me, I just don't see that. I'm very sorry, but I don't see how sort of this means that everything is meaningless, or how even why life would be meaningful when on theism, right? I don't really see that either, right? To me, that's really not clear. So from personal sort of experience, I could say that is not true, right? I don't find atheism any less meaningful than I found theism at the time. But yeah, it might vary from person to person depending on how convinced you are of certain sort of relationships. I just don't think it has to be this way, and I haven't seen really a clear sort of clear-cut case or a clear-cut argument that would definitely show why atheism is meaningless, or like commits you to nihilism or something.
Yeah, same. It's following half the argument and forgetting about where that conclusion takes you after that.
Yeah. Also, there was like constantly like this sort of
evil overlord atheists.
Yeah, that's a bit, but also there was like a very strong sort of intertwining between sort of atheism and materialism and stuff like that. And look, I think it's kind of fair, because a lot of atheists sort of do hold these things like jointly, and I mean, it would be fair to say that a lot of atheists are sort of in this camp, but it's not like if you debunk materialism or anything that you debunked atheism, and there are plenty of ways you could be an atheist and not be a materialist and stuff like that. So I mean, there's really not. I kind of really dislike it when I mean, I kind of understand it, why they do it, because it's very popular, right? But I dislike when apologists are like arguing against materialism and then say, "Haha, atheism is wrong," right? I find that's annoying, but maybe that's just because of some views that I hold, or some things that I'm considering more so than anything else. Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to address, either of you?
There was a lot of straw manning going on in that video. Like, even the kind of arguments against atheism they presented, one of them was based on something that atheists don't hold to. I can't remember what it was. Number 2. Something to do with the fine tuning, maybe. I can't remember, but there was something.
Oh yeah, it was
something from nothing as well.
Yeah. There was this. I think he said something like from pure chance, right, or something along those lines when he was talking about that it just emerges out of chaos, like these types of sort of creationist type things that.
Yeah, and they sort of load the emotional baggage that's about to come next, and good rhetorical skills, probably better than a lot of philosophical atheists have when it comes to rhetorical skills.
Yeah, I'd also say that in the end, right, I don't think that it's unreasonable, at least for some of these points, to consider them evidence for theism. I said as much on the first point, for example, stuff like that. But at the end, the way he concludes, right, it's so. I mean, it's kind of it's so dishonest, right? Because there is so much stuff that is counter evidence, right? You say, oh, well, it's exactly, this universe is these things are exactly what we would expect given theism. And I mean, sure, fine, I'm happy to grant some of these things, right? But then for you to say that, like, to pretend that this is the only thing that's going on, right? That this is all the things that we observe, and all of these things are exactly the way we would expect them given theism, is just so far from the truth, right? There's so much stuff, and some of these things we mentioned, right? Like we mentioned, for example, the argument from scale. But you could make the problem of evil alone, right, and the suffering that you have to endure through evolution, right, that is as good a counter evidence as you can ask for as an atheist, right? Like it's very hard to imagine what else you could ask for than sort of suffering embedded in the very process of evolution as evidence against sort of a benevolent creator. That's like almost the perfect counter, right? And you're sort of completely ignoring that. You're just like, oh yeah, I'm not going to talk about these sort of specifics, right? And alongside all of these things, there's so much other things, right? So many observations that you can make about the world, the world, and these sort of like are exactly the opposite of what you would expect given theism. For like from religious disagreement to the demographics of theism, right, to the way beliefs develops in the individuals and stuff like that, right, to the way belief is lost, to the way non-believers behave, right, to again the evils we experience, the kinds of evils, the way we experience them. Like there's so much stuff that you could cite as completely unexpected given theism that I find it just ultimately very, very, I mean, I don't want to say dishonest because I don't know if this was sort of purposefully done, right? But it's misleading, I should say. It's very misleading to just say.
I'm going with purposefully done.
Yeah.
Even PragerU's track record. Yeah.
Don't look at all of these other things. Look at the tiniest things, right? That slightly are more expected given theism, right? That's perfectly what we would expect given theism. I'm going to write a whole book about it. Look at this, right? And science agrees with me, by the way, right? And these are slightly more expected than theism. Congratulations, right? But you ignore all the details of these things, of the very things that you're citing, by the way. So,
coupled with all the quote mining that he did of people. Look, even these atheists say this thing. They say it has to be a god. No.
Yeah. There is one quote. Oops,
sorry. No, go for it.
There is one quote that I did like, but I think is slightly wrong. The existence or non-existence of God is probably the most important question we can ask. I don't think it's the most important question, but I think it is an important question, one that everybody should sort of explore, even if you're not thinking about a God of punishment and reward. It changes the way we look at the universe and how we look at the universe. So,
yeah, I tend to agree that it is. I think theists tend to say that it's the most important question because they embed into that hypothesis the possible consequences, right, or of eternal life and hell. But even if you don't believe in hell and you're just an annihilationist or something, right, there's still pretty big consequences. And that's why they tend to say that this is the most important question, right? And I think certainly if you're a theist, that seems to follow, right, for me. But I just think that theists don't realize just how little credence some atheists assign to those sort of things, right? And if you assign that little credence to it, it just seems weird for you to say that it's the most important question because it's something that you just really don't find, right? Like even it's so remote, right, that you're not really considering it, right? It's as if someone came down the street and threatened whatever, right? It could be true, right, but it's really not something that you're actively thinking about. So I think for a lot of atheists this is not going to be like a very important question, and I think that's kind of understandable. I mean, for me it is, but I think for a lot of atheists, understandably, that's not going to be a hugely important question. Yeah.
Paul Marco brings up one that he also mentioned was that atheists posit directed panspermia because they don't want to accept design from the Expelled movie.
He posted, that was one of the things in the video, wasn't it? One of the quick flashes of weird things atheists believe, and it was aliens and stuff like that. That was one of the things that made me think, hang on a second.
Yeah. So, I mean, some might, but some, I think generally when that's put down is someone going, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. There's a number of things it could be. There's a lot of things that we can't test for right now, so we're going to focus on what we can,
I think Dawkins gave us an answer once to, do you think we could be intelligently designed? And he said something like, yeah, if aliens came from another planet and deposited us here and flew away, that's the only way I can imagine it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
But that's not saying that that's what he believes.
Yeah.
No, that's it.
Yeah, well, that's like a serious hypothesis that anyone is bringing up, right? Like, it was just so, yeah. Oh, yeah, they think that aliens have done it.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty bad.
So Esmond says, I always thought atheism as a position that says God does not exist. You can demonstrate that this claim is true. So that's what they meant by prove before, in some cases, and say that the existence of this type of God is impossible. Now, that's what I was saying earlier. Now, so I would agree with you that atheism ought to be understood as, the proposition gods do not exist. However, not all atheists use it that way, especially on social media. You'll find some that actually use it the way we'd think about them, as being agnostic. They're on the fence, they're lacking belief both ways. But I'm not so tied to like a label. It's the underlying content that's important. So if they might be typically in the agnostic or agnostic position, but they want to be known as an atheist, that's fine. So now we know that you're talking about atheism in the way we are, so as sort of the proposition gods do not exist, with the atheists like us accepting this as true. Yes, in some cases, I would say that you can show that this particular god is impossible based on a number of parameters that are presented. One of them that comes up is all the various problems of evil, but the logical problem of evil would answer that sort of benevolent, all-powerful, knowing style God. Esmond then goes on to say, example of this is benevolent creator and problem of evil, but against others you kind of forced to say agnostic. Well, you're not necessarily forced to say agnostic. So that article I linked to you to earlier, Why Do I Believe No Gods Exist, has my justifications for more than just the god of classical theism or the god of Christianity. I had to speak about polytheistic gods and other god claims in there. But one thing that you can say, from everything I've looked into, I've become a naturalist, and therefore there is only the natural, and therefore that can influence the fact that there is no supernatural. Can I prove without a doubt that there isn't something out there? No, of course not. But I don't have to remain agnostic on the proposition that no gods exist. So I can still accept this proposition. It's just with certain god claims, my credence might be lower than others.
Yeah, I tend to agree with almost everything that you said. I guess I don't think that you can prove that some gods, like logically prove that some gods do not exist, or that there are sort of gods that have inconsistent, like they're internally inconsistent, right? I think even the classical theist god, right, of Christianity, I think it's even like the logical problem of evil, for example, right? It's not something, the premises are not something that every theist has to be committed to, for example, right? So I don't think that in that sense it is logically necessary that God doesn't exist, right? I think it's like the premises seem to me extremely, extremely likely to be true. I think a lot of theists are like a very hard pressed to sort of try to defend that. That's why we have like a plethora of theodicies and all sorts of things, right? Because they're trying to make these things work. I think that like problems of evil are very powerful, but I don't think that they go as far as to say that any god is like logically internally inconsistent in a way, right? That would be sort of more my position, I think.
It depends on how much if you've got the claims there and you've got XYZ, I think that would you could have the claims of the particular god that they don't work, which is why then sometimes additional stuff gets added or excuses are made. That's why there's theodicies.
Yeah, but like that just shows that. So sorry if I go ahead. I don't want to.
No, go for it.
No, I just wanted to say that just goes to show like these excuses, as you say, right? There are ways to to make it like they show that you can be coherent in holding all of these things, right? It's not a problem about coherency, right? It would be a problem for the theist if the theist accepted both premises of the problems of evil and didn't accept the conclusion. That's sort of like a logical problem for the theist, right? But the theist is not committed to that, right? And this is what Plantinga actually was trying to point out in his defense, right? The very famous defense that then became sort of like a free will theodicy. But the way he intended it is just, it doesn't matter how likely, right, the excuse, as you will, the theist puts forth is, right? This just goes to show that it is possible, right, to hold these things and still be consistent and not committed to the conclusion that God doesn't exist, right? So that just goes to show that it is logically possible to not be committed to the idea that God doesn't exist, right? He didn't even get into likelihood of how likely it is that this free will argument works, because the thing he wanted to show is merely that it is possible, right? That it is not a logical problem in the same sense that, say, a square circle would be a logical problem, right? That it is directly sort of contradictory to say these things. And I think he was right in this respect. I don't think it works great as a theodicy. I think it's pretty weak, but I think a lot of theists recognize this, right? I think a lot of theodicies are very weak. I think this is also something that some theists recognize. But yeah, it's not like a strictly logical thing. That's the sort of, that was just explaining what I think about this.
Yeah, that's fair. So yeah, so there I'd go with it, Esmond. I mean, like I said, I mean, I'll paste the link in if you want to have a look at some of my other arguments in there. As oh, what did I just press? I think I might have accidentally blocked you, Esmond. I hope I didn't though.
Yeah, you
I did.
You did, yeah.
So Esmond,
Yeah.
I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry. How do I unblock?
I don't know if you can do that.
I can't do it from my chat.
All of his messages. That's.
I did not mean to do that, Esmond. I'm trying to do too many things at once.
I think I've just unhidden him.
Okay, good. Thank you. Sorry, I was on the restream chat and I was trying to click reply and I accidentally clicked underneath block user on YouTube.
Yeah,
sorry,
like
Esmond.
Questions here with censoring.
But Dave has done that. Let me sorry, come back to the I'll paste that to you again. Let me try and press reply to you. Reply and send it. There's a number of different arguments there, and yeah, so I would say that there are certain arguments that you know that respond to specific claims that would say that at the very least make it incredibly unlikely, if not impossible, for that particular claim. But gods in general, that I think there's always going to be that possibility there. But you're still within your right to believe they don't exist for a number of different reasons.
Yeah, I think Icarus actually pointed out some of these things. For example, like if you believe that naturalism is likely, right, as a metaphysical theory, then that entails that you believe that theism is unlikely, right? Because that means that supernaturalism is unlikely, and theism is a subset of supernaturalism. So that, for example, would be one way you could do this, but you could do it also from explanatory power, right? Like just from how expensive the theory is, in the sense that a simpler theory is better, right? And metaphysical naturalism seems to be simpler than theism because it has a lot of things in common, minus some commitments of theism, and explains just as much, right? So you could do it for sort of parsimony reasons, to believe that this is, and this works for deism as well, for example. It doesn't have to be theism. And yeah, I think there are a lot of ways that you could argue against other gods that are not a Christian God. But also in general, right? Because again, I don't believe that there is sort of like a way to logically show that God is impossible, right? I think there are great deductive arguments for atheism where I hold the premises to be extremely likely. There are sort of inductive versions of those arguments, and all of them work for like a lot of different gods. And then, of course, there are gods that sort of remove some of these attributes, and then sort of going to have to do a little bit more work, but I think some of them are general enough for me to be skeptical of all of them. Then, of course, the closer you get to something like a sort of Christian God, the more skeptical I am. But I would be skeptical of deistic gods as well, personally.
Sorry, I just Icarus said the god of Microsoft works, and Nerdy Rodent responded as if they were a paperclip. It looks like you're trying to create a universe. Brilliant. So, guys, did you have anything that you wanted to add about this video tonight, or anything else?
No, it was good. It was a fun time. Thanks for joining, Philip.
Yeah, I'm talking way too much.
No, it's great listening to you.
No, great to have you back.
I really have to get used to this.
We need someone on the channel who knows what they're talking about.
Yeah, but I really don't, though.
Neither do I. You sound better than we do, so.
You got that sort of Italian charm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I see.
I see. +5 charisma because of Italian heritage.
Also, I just realised Dave's not in the chat, so.
Oh my God, Dave's not here.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So hopefully everything's all right.
Yeah. Well, he was there yesterday at Luke's stream. So hopefully nothing happened overnight. But Dave, when you're catching this on the rerun, hey. So yeah, okay. Thursday, we actually don't have a plan yet. I'll try and pull something out of my ass.
I know you wanted to do the value one.
Yeah.
And we did this one tonight. Do you want to do the one on value on Thursday?
I am happy to do it. It just it might be more of a general chat on value, but if we do the general chat on value, it can be a chance to refine my thoughts and maybe put like a little solo video together. I know we've both got articles on value, and it's going to be sort of along those lines, but I wanted to be a little bit more thorough with them as well.
Yeah, but we can just shoot the shit.
Yeah,
knock stuff around. Yeah.
All right, so Thursday we're going to do value. I'm not sure about next Tuesday, but the Thursday after that, Philip's going to be back, and so is Reverend Fidel, and we're going to be discussing indoctrination. So that is going to be an interesting conversation. There's some misconceptions about indoctrination and what makes people theists. And we're hopefully going to cover that off in enough detail to dispel some myths and explain what it really is, and the difference between, you know, someone that believes because they were brought up a theist and someone that was truly indoctrinated into a particular faith. Other than that, yeah, I guess we'll see you Thursday for the value stream. Do you guys have anything to say before we sign off?
Nope. Just thanks for joining us. Had a really great time.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you for the conversation. It was great. Yeah,
no, it's great. Thank you for being here, and thank you everybody who has been participating in the chat tonight, and everybody that's catching the rerun as well. Always fantastic to have you here. And if you missed out on Luke's stream on Monday, check it out. He's talking about borderline personality disorder. Definitely something worth checking out. Anyway, you've been watching the SciPhi Show. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
I'm Philip.